This little Sony has been with me on and off for over a decade and still going strong. Let's get into it. Let's go back to 2013. The Wolf of Wall Street is in theaters, The Last of Us is on your PS3. Canon had just released T5i, and Sony the A7 and the RX100 Mark II. Sony also released the Sony f2.8 Pancake, a small, compact pancake lens. Now, this is one of Sony's original E-mount Pancake primes, and I'll say original even though I don't think there's a whole lot of pancakes they put out there. This lens is just over 2 centimeters thick and weighs about as much as a deck of cards, 20mm APS-C focal length, so in full frame terms, it's more like a 30mm focal length. But for all intents and purposes, I treat this like a 28mm focal length, just like my Ricoh GR III. There's no optical stabilization, no aperture ring, just a manual focus ring. So basically, it's the kind of lens that if you slap this onto your Sony E-mount body, it's gonna be pretty small, pretty light and tight, and something that I think you can fit into your pocket, depending what the camera body is, but it's going to be very easy to carry around with you most of the time if you really wanted to bring a camera with you that was not your smartphone. And at the time, it was good justification for me because I was going from T3i to the A6000. I realized I don't like bulky DSLRs and I wanted to move to a mirrorless system and try out the Sony system. And this was the perfect way to really justify going to a smaller system. But if you're buying a lens like this, you're not buying it for the technical perfection. It was more about always having a very good option for taking photos and videos in your pocket at all times. And when the Sony f2.8 came out, I'd say the reviews were kind of mixed. They were polite. People really did like how small and light it was, but for the most part, they didn't love the image quality for the price. And I think that's still true because I don't think the price of this has changed all that much. It was often compared to the Sony 16 2.8, and a lot of people just said, look, this is fine, but it's nothing special. The corners were soft, the aperture wasn't really interesting, and Sony was still early in the mirrorless game at the time. Reviewers were mostly saying, look, it's good for travel, it's not pro quality. But here's the thing, 12 years later, I am still using this lens. But this little lens, to me, it's still useful, and it's still good for the purpose that it was originally intended for back in 2013. And maybe that's why I think it's still worth talking about in 2025. Now, personally, I've actually owned 2 copies of this lens. My original one when I had the A6000, and then I had a bit of an experimentation phase when I went to try out the Olympus Micro Four Thirds system and the Fuji colors right after that. But eventually I came back to Sony. And over the years, despite whichever system was on, I really do like Pancake lens. Tiny, simple, always ready to go. My favorites were the Canon 22 f2, the Olympus 17 1.8, the Panasonic 20 1.7, and this Sony 2.8. I have found nothing quite similar to this on E-mount, and boy, have I tried. I've even used this on my Sony a7C full frame camera. These tiny cameras and lenses, I love them so much. I should probably start a playlist on that. So if you're into that vibe, why don't you subscribe? But now it's 2025. Phones are incredible. You've got the iPhone 17 Pro Max, for instance, that I do have. And when I look at the photos side by side, they're getting pretty close. Back when this lens came out, it was 2013. You had the iPhone 5S, the Galaxy S4. You probably had some Nokia Lumia series cameras out back then. But in 2025, why would you even think about this lens? Well, you don't have to overthink this type of a lens. You slap it on a small body and you don't worry too much. You just shoot. And something like this helps you really get into the moment, just like the Ricoh GR III to me. And if you're buying something like this, you're a hobbyist like me, probably. Someone who cares more about capturing moments than really like pixel perfection. And it's fun and doesn't clutter up my camera roll like my iPhone does. f2.8, the bokeh on this lens is pleasing enough. In daylight, a modern smartphone probably can get quite close to this, but the distinguishing factor is still low light capabilities. You can collect so much more light relative to your smartphone camera sensor, and that lets you get a faster shutter speed, freeze that decisive moment of your kid jumping or reducing blur in general, things a phone can't handle quite as cleanly. And so why would you pick this lens over a modern phone in 2025? Well, let's say you already have a small E-mount body like the Sony ZV-E10 Mark I or II, and you want something that performs better in low light than your smartphone. Well, this is that lens. Second, let's say you want a bit more versatility than something like the Ricoh GR III or IV. This lens does do video too, even if the autofocus makes a little bit of noise into your video. Third, it's small enough to fit into my jacket pockets, and because of that, I'm just more likely to bring it out with me than any of my other lenses. I just don't bring those out. And at the end of the day, the value proposition is the same as it was in 2013. It's about convenience, flexibility, and a little extra creative control all in this tight little package, and that hasn't changed over 12 years. Certainly not perfect. The flaws are the same as they were in 2013. 2013, no aperture ring, sharp in the center, corners a bit soft, not as breathtaking as say a longer focal length with a wider aperture. Autofocus can be a little bit noisy in video, but it's reliable, small, and easy to carry. You know, there's compromises that had to be made and it still works in today's day and age. There used to be this YouTube channel that I really liked, Gear Doesn't Matter by Matthias Berling. And every time I picked up this lens with a body attached, I really thought about that. I remember that idea that gear doesn't matter. This was about fun. And having something this small and light made it easy to grab every day and just have fun shooting. In terms of recommendation, if you do come across this lens on Marketplace or something like that, and you already have a small E-mount body, I would really consider picking it up and just playing with it. You're more likely to have it with you than a larger lens, and to me it still has a meaningful advantage over the iPhone, especially in low light. But that's it for this one. I probably just got too attached to this lens. Anyway, subscribe if that's your vibe. Otherwise, see you in the next video. Peace out.